All right, so we started off just like a typical business presentation. So I want to check and make sure we have everybody here today. I know I saw Naomi. Alberto's in the back. RJ's supposed to be here. RJ, are you here? I think he was maybe calling in. RJ?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute.
Oh, good. Okay, awesome. So we're a little late getting going. I want to make sure we get through this. We've got some meaty content today. So I'm here to talk about the analysis recently completed by the analytics team. I'm just going to jump right in. So here you'll see some notes on the data. You don't really need to worry about this. I'll tell you about the one really important thing. Let me see, where is it? NPS. So our Net Promoter Score. This is what we use as our biggest measure when we're really trying to understand our customer feedback. Now, when customers leave us feedback, they can rate us between 1 and 5 stars. We consider 1 to 3 stars to be our detractors, those not likely to recommend us. 4 stars are the passives, and 5 stars are promoters. So NPS, Net Promoter Score, are promoters minus detractors. All right, if you have other questions about this, reach out to me afterwards. Okay, so our analysis, there's a lot of data going on here, I know, I'm sorry. On the top left-hand graph, this is NPS over time. So we see it moves around a little bit, but it's flat to increasing over time. We think this is great. If we move over here to the right-hand side, that 37 NPS in the latest month puts us at 4th position amongst our competitive set. We're pretty happy with that. If we go down to the bottom left, this shows the breakdown of NPS components over time, so those passive detractors, promoters that I talked about. We actually see something sort of interesting happening here, which is the promoters are decreasing over time. We're seeing an increase, the passives are decreasing over time. We see an increase in promoters and also an increase in detractors. And then finally, our comment analysis, if we move down here to the bottom right, so in addition to leaving numerical comments, people can leave us text comments as well, so in addition to those numerical ratings. Interestingly, a lower proportion of promoters leave us comments. And those comments tend to be less actionable, things like, it's awesome, it's great, I love it, versus detractors leave relatively more comments, and their comments are mainly about latency. All right, this pretty much just recaps what I just said, so I think we're done. So that was underwhelming. People were sort of paying attention, but I have no idea, now leaving this conference room, if the data I just covered is going to change how anybody does anything. All right, we'll try better next time. So I'm still pondering this as I'm standing in my kitchen after work, thinking about why is it that business presentations are like this, and how can we make them better? And as I'm doing this, I notice something interesting. My 2-year-old Dorian is sitting on the couch reading a book. Now, he's 2. He doesn't read, right? They can't do that yet. But he's sitting there, he's flipping the pages, and he's telling himself the story, which is sort of an amazing thing when we stop and think about that. So I'll talk more about why I think that is in a moment. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about the book he's reading. The book he's reading is Larry Gets Lost in Seattle. John Skews wrote a whole series of these books. Larry Gets Lost in a lot of different cities. And the plot each time is totally the same. There are 2 main characters, a little boy, Pete, and his dog, Larry. And they go on great adventures to different cities across the US. Seattle one starts off, Mom and Dad, Pete and Larry crossed the water on a ferry. I'm thinking maybe they're on Bainbridge Island, near where I grew up. Soon the city was very near. The ferried boat docked by a pier. And now, inevitably, Pete and Larry get separated. Usually Larry chases a piece of pizza he sees or a donut. They get separated. And they spend most of the rest of the book trying to find each other, seeing some local destinations, some local highlights along the way. And there's this building tension, right? So here they are, for example, at Pike Place Market. Larry saw some salmon passing by, not in the water, but in the sky. And so they keep having these near misses, right? If we notice, Pete's actually back here, but he doesn't see Larry, and Larry doesn't see Pete. And there's this building tension throughout the story that reaches a point of climax when little boy Pete wonders if he'll ever find his pup Larry again. And the pup Larry wonders, am I ever going to find my little boy Pete again? My son, Dorian, is visibly upset at this point. But then, inevitably, that tension is resolved. Pete and Larry find each other, and it is a happy ending. Larry, by the way, gets lost in a ton of places. I was actually curious to see if he gets lost anywhere near Florida, but he apparently doesn't travel to the southeast. The closest place he gets lost is over there in the water under the sea. Anyway, back to Dorian, right? So my son, he's sitting on the couch reading this book. And I was thinking about why that is, right? Why can he sit there and read the pages but not really read and figure out what's going on? And I think it boils down mainly to three things. First, repetition. We've read this book and these series of books many, many, many times. And there's something that happens with repetition that helps things move from our short-term memory to our long-term memory, helps things stick with us. Another thing that helps in this situation is pictures. So pictures assist recall, which means as Dorian is flipping through the pages, he's seeing the pictures. He's being reminded of the story. Which brings me to the third and arguably most important component here, which is story. Right? There is a plot, there's a rising action, there is a point of climax where tensions reach their highest, there's a falling action, there's a resolution. And it struck me that we can use that same shape, that same narrative arc, when we're communicating in a business setting as well. Use it to get our audience's attention, use it to maintain their attention to be able to make our point and drive them to action. Because a typical business presentation doesn't incorporate any of this. Typical business presentation follows a very linear path, like what we looked at briefly before. We perhaps start off with a hypothesis, right? What was the question we asked? What did we set out to solve? Then our data, what did we look at? How did we get it? How did we clean it? The analysis we undertook, right? What did we do to understand this data and create insight? And then finally, the findings. What did we learn from this? This is a very selfish path, right? This is the path that I, as the analyst, went through. It doesn't take my audience into account at any point. Versus if we shift this and we think of it as a story with components of story, right? We have a plot, we have a rising action, we have climax, falling action, this ending. All of the same components that we talked about with Pete and Larry. Right? They start off on their way to Seattle. They get separated. There's this building tension reaching a point of climax when they wonder if they'll ever find each other again. A falling action as their paths start to bring them together. And finally, resolution as the pair is reunited. That tension is resolved. I can use this same path for my data presentation. And when I do so, it forces me to think about things not from my perspective alone, but also from my audience's perspective. Let's take a look at what that could look like. So I might start off with the plot. Right? We do this every month. Mainly we look at NPS. The overall story is it's been flat to slightly increasing over time. But as we start to peel back the onion, we get this rising action, where the passive group is shrinking over time, having an increasingly polarized customer base. More promoters, but also more detractors, right? This is our climax. This is a negative trend, something we want to raise awareness to and turn around. Then our falling action. But detractors actually tell us a lot about why they're not likely to recommend our product. Therefore, our ending, our resolution, is what do we do to address this, right? If latency is an issue, let's recommend we prioritize latency improvements and resolve that tension. So I think about the tension from my audience's standpoint. What can I use to get their attention and maintain their attention? And then my ending, my resolution, becomes what can my audience do to resolve that tension that I've introduced or that I've brought to light? So today I'm here to talk about our recent analysis of customer feedback. As you can probably guess from the title here, detractors are going to play a big role in the story that I'm about to tell you. So my goal today is twofold. I want to start by sharing with you what we've learned from our recent analysis of customer feedback. Overall story, just give you a little sneak peek, it would be seemingly positive. NPS has been increasing. But as we look at the pieces, we're actually seeing a very disconcerting trend with detractors increasing over time. So the second thing I want to do today is use that information to revisit our product strategy and really emphasize latency, the thing that detractors are unhappy about when we think about where we want to spend our resources next. So let's take a look at some data. First off, NPS. So we see it flat to slightly increasing over time. We're at 37 in the latest period. Just to put that into context, amongst our competitor set, this puts us in 4th position. I actually think that by following the recommendation we're going to talk about today, prioritizing latency, it will allow us to move further up. Because when we look at the components of NPS, we see something interesting and disconcerting happening. I'm going to build this up for you piece by piece. So here on our y-axis, we have percent of total. On our x-axis is time. Start out with the passives. So see, this group is shrinking over time when it comes to what proportion our passives make up of our total customers, those providing feedback. So we see some of those moving in the positive direction, right? Promoters at the top there are increasing over time. But as you can probably imagine by the gap left in my graph here, detractors are also increasing. If we put some numbers there, they're increasing on the order of nearly doubling when it comes to the proportion that they make up of total over the past 6-7 months. Detractors tell us more things, though. So when we look at all of our customer feedback, 15% leave comments in addition to a numerical rating. But when we look at that number for detractors, it's up at 29%. So detractors are telling us why they're not likely to recommend our product. And their feedback is based on one thing more than anything else: latency. In fact, 1 of every 3 comments we get from detractors talks about latency or speed issues as the primary concern. Here's an example of what someone said. My frustration in a single word is latency. It takes forever for the app to open. When it works great. But I spend too much time waiting, wondering, it hangs. Therefore, the recommendation coming out of this is one thing, which is let's revisit our pricing, or our product strategy, and prioritize latency improvements. Let's talk about this. So that was a more productive meeting. I was able to use data to get my audience's attention, identify tension that will get them to listen and pay attention, hopefully motivate them to act. Very different from the typical business presentation. Actually framed up a discussion. I know now what people are going to do leaving the room here today. And it's because of those same 3 things that we talked about with Dorian, reading his book. Repetition. So I made use of the finding, the recommendation, a number of times throughout my presentation. Pictures. Pairing effective data visualization with story is sort of a magical thing, because when I do that now, not only can my audience remember what they heard, but they can also remember what they saw. And then finally, story. Making use of this narrative structure that has a plot and a rising action and twists and climax and a falling action and a resolution, really framing things from my audience's standpoint. So I'm never simply showing data, I'm making data a pivotal point in an overarching story. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Cole. The last story we're going to have here before going to lunch is about the most glamorous part of this entire process, which we all know is the scraping and cleaning and all of those steps that are involved with, especially when it's precise data like dialogue. So please put your hands together. We're going to have Matthew Daniels, from the editor of Polygraph, which I'm real excited about, come up and give this presentation about how he went through his process steps, and it's very practical and giving tips on how to get that kind of upfront process that helps us find the stories so that we can then tell them. So Matthew Daniels, come on up.